The Wisconsin Public Education Network is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy coalition connecting all public education supporters to information, action, and each other to be a stronger collective voice for the excellent public schools all children deserve. And our meetings are safe spaces for our active partners and allies to connect, to learn, and to take collective action. And our events are open to those who share our vision for a just and equitable public school where all children have equal opportunity to thrive. So during the course of this meeting, Dr. Underwood, not Underlee, will be giving a presentation. Christian will be running her slide deck, and I will be monitoring the chat. So please feel free to pop any questions you might have in the chat as we go along, and I will moderate that for Julie.
Yeah.
Are you ready, Julie?
I am ready. Thank you.
So Julie, I'll just give a little bit about you, Julie.
Oh, okay.
Julie Underwood is a nationally recognized authority on school law and served as the UW-Madison School of Education Dean for 10 years. She's also a friend of mine in the network, as well as the president of the Wisconsin Alliance for Excellent Schools Board. Julie.
Thank you. And I want to join Jenny's thanks to everybody for taking their time out to talk about school finance, because I know that not everybody is as geeky as I am. I could talk about school finance for a long time. And I do know some other people who would do that too. Chris Humboldt Boyle's here, and she and I've spent hours talking about school finance. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and learn with us. Depending on how we go, I'm quite willing to answer questions as we go along. I learned to teach as a law professor. And so I would rather talk with people. I'm not really, my strength is not lecturing and lecturing. And that's one of the reasons that that Christian sent the slide deck out to you. He sent it out, and you can have that in front of you. I just wanted to give you a preparatory set of what we're going to cover, what we could cover. I think I probably have some hidden slides at the very end, maybe, about other things that we could cover. But I wanted you to know kind of what I was thinking about doing. I'm thinking about doing the big basics, so people would understand how our formula works in the big picture, not in the fine detail, and talking about equalization funding and per pupil aid. We do want to talk about how vouchers have impacted our funding. We do want to talk about revenue limits. We do want to talk about referenda, and we do want to talk about special education funding. So all of those things I am planning on covering. And if we'll talk about those as in those categories. But honestly, if there's something you don't get, or you want me to cover it in a different way, or if I use jargon in my classroom, if somebody's using jargon and other people don't understand it, they knock on their desk. And that means, wait a second, stop. I have no idea what you're saying. And back up so that I'm included in this conversation, because you just used some jargon that I have no idea. So I'm not sure whether Zoom has a knock emoji, but do something to catch our attention. Give us a wave, lift a hand, and both Christian and Jenny are going to help me as we go through this, and they'll make sure that we get that you get our attention if there's any kind of question as we go along, or conversation. Thank God, conversation. I have some caveats. One is you have my slide deck, and Christian is going to run my slide deck. Thank you very much, Christian. I've never had anyone run my slide deck in 30 years. So this is weird for me, but Zoom doesn't let you see people and share your screen. I'm sure you've all experienced that. And I really do need to see your faces in order to understand what's happening. I mean, and in order, so Christian's going to run that slide deck for me. There, okay, so we're going to talk about basic school finance. My other caveats are, I have gotten my slides from everywhere. All of the misstatements and typos are my own. All of the stuff that's right is from slide decks from the Summer Summit, slide decks from the Department of Public Instruction. They're great about sharing their slide decks too. And you know, I guess that's it. Mainly from WPEN and from DPI, and my own slides that I've kind of put together and knitted together in this way. Jenny's going to monitor the chat. I think we're ready to go. So, okay, if I'm a school attorney, and so I always start out with the Wisconsin Constitution when I think about school finance. And here's the article, Article 10, Section 3 of the Wisconsin Constitution. I'm not going to read it to you, although I could because I do love it. And it's I
made that work this morning for the whole day.
I'm sorry. Oh, that was just somebody unmuted there. This is really important for several reasons. One reason is that I want people to always remember that funding public education, creating a system of public education in the state of Wisconsin, is the legislature's constitutional obligation by virtue of this phrase in the Wisconsin Constitution. They have an obligation to create a uniform system, uniform is practicable, whatever that means, of public schools, of district schools, and without tuition. No tuition can be charged, so it has to be free. So that means that it's going to be funded by, generally by state and local money, because there would be no other way to do it, right? And the other thing that I want people to remember in this piece is the Wisconsin Supreme Courts, and I'm not going to go through all of the Wisconsin Supreme Court decisions about this clause, but the Wisconsin Supreme Court has basically said that children do have a right to an education in the state of Wisconsin, and they have a right to an equal opportunity. And that constitutional right, state constitutional right to an education in Wisconsin comes from this clause and the Wisconsin Supreme Court cases that have followed interpreting this clause. Please also remember, we don't have a federal constitutional right to an education. Every state has something similar to this. And if there is a right, students' right to an education, it comes from these state constitutional provisions. So state obligation, requirement of uniformity, and that it's guaranteed, required by the legislature and guaranteed. Fourth one, that's a student's rights to do that. So, okay, let's move into how we get money. There we go. This is kind of a nebulous kind of a chart here because the share has changed over time. When we're talking about the general breakdown of funding, this is all of the money that a state may receive. That other sources is federal funding, which is minimal, particularly in the state of Wisconsin, usually averages about 5%, only 5 or 6%, even though they have big impact on what we do and how we do it. In a typical year, it's only 5 or 6% of our district's funding, average district funding. Now, of course, with ESSER money, that's not true. The federal money has increased significantly, but that's a blip. It's not part of our general revenue. We can't assume that it's going to go on ad infinitum. And as you're planning in a school for a budget, you have to think about money that's solid money, predictable money. The other thing that would be in that other sources, there are some schools who sell things, schools who, take naming rights on their football field lights, those kind of things. I'd dump that in there. Very, very small percentage of any school district's funding. We basically have state money and we have local money. And it's years ago, there was a provision or a promise that the state would provide 2/3 funding for school districts. That was in exchange for some other promises back and forth. The only part of that deal was political deal that's left is that we have revenue limits. So that was 1993 when the state promised to fund 2/3 of the cost of education in the state of Wisconsin. That 2/3 started being eroded so that the local share became larger and larger until recently. In the last decade, our budgets have been strangled enough and they've kind of shrunk to the point that now the state can technically say that they're doing 2/3 funding again, which is horribly ironic and sad. Absolutely sad. So what we have in our state until this most recent budget, it was about a 50-50 state funding and local school district, local property tax. If you look all around the United States, the state of Wisconsin is incredibly heavy on property tax reliance. Most states have moved away from that and use other forms of taxation to generate funds for schools, but we are heavily reliant on local property tax. Okay, so now I want to think about the bigger picture, and then I'm going to stop for a minute after that. This bigger picture. So keep this picture in mind. I'm a very visual person, so I need graphics and things like that, like Venn diagrams and stuff like that. So what I've got here is school finance simplified, maybe not really simplified, but this is the biggest picture that we can kind of put together. The state equalization money is the state money that we have. And then we have property tax as well. So if you go on that equation from right to left, kind of as if you were checking your math, your property tax levy, that's a local share. Your state equalization money is most of the state share that the state's going to give you. And if you add the two of those together, it's your revenue limit. This is a very odd thing that we have in the state of Wisconsin, and I want to do a little deeper dive on it in a couple minutes. But this revenue limit is a spending limit. They call it a revenue limit. Actually, in Wisconsin school finance, they call lots of things that they aren't. To me, it's intentional, opaque kind of hocus pocus crap. Sorry, can I do that? Yeah. If you're offended, I apologize. But this whole thing is not very transparent. It's not that complicated, but it's not very transparent. So this revenue is the amount that you can, as a district, can spend per child in your district. And if the state actually gives you more money without changing that revenue limit, then the only thing that happens is you give money back to your local taxpayers. It's property tax relief, because you can't spend any more than your revenue limit. That being said, those things that are outside the revenue limit are those kind of beach balls down at the bottom. The state could give us, and has given us, per pupil aid. That's outside of the revenue limit or on top of the revenue limit. The categoricals like special education funding, that's outside of it. Federal funds are outside of the revenue limit, and other kind of things that you might earn yourself, like if you do a bake sale or if you sell naming rights to your lights, those kind of things. If let's go to the next slide, because this is a more complicated view of the first one. Keep the beach ball slide in your head or at your hand. This is the way that DPI presents it, which I do think is a bit confusing. It is technically clearer. It's technically more accurate, but I do think it's a bit more confusing. And that's the way you will see it shown most of the time, where the equalization aids, shared costs, tertiary aid, and all this other kind of stuff. It's not that complicated. It is the beach ball slide. So think about the beach ball slide, because that's what we're going to dig into. Or let's just go on, and you've got the beach ball slide in front of you. So I want to look at this. The very first part of the beach ball slide talks about equalization aid. And the reason we have equalization aid is because if you remember the state constitutional requirement, uniformity, well, you know that there are some school districts who could raise more money than others, even if they levy the same amount, because some of them are incredibly wealthy, property wealthy, and some of them are property poor. So in a way to equalize that, the state has this equalization aid. And what it's intended to do is provide those property poor districts with more state money and property rich districts with less state money. And that's what you see with the red and blue line that goes across there. If you notice to the left, that would be $200,000 property value per student. DPI always says per member, per student. They're actually people. So per student. And the lower the property tax base, notice the higher the bar graph is for the state money, that blue money. Maybe I should do that in green so it really looks like money. I'll do that next time.
Julie?
Mm-hmm.
Just before we can move on, will you just explain the difference between per pupil aid and per pupil revenue?
Yes. Per pupil aid is equalization aid, and it is what the state gives you in the equalization formula. Per pupil revenue is your revenue limit, what you can actually spend per pupil. And then there are those things that are on top of it as well. Thank you very much for asking. I'm glad that somebody knocked and you got it, Jenny, unless that was just you, which you're omniscient if it was. And you could be. I think you are most of the time. In the one thing that this equalization aid is, so it equalizes for property values so that a school district could levy, 3 mills, and though poor districts would get more because they could pull it down from the state. And the rich districts, they can get a lot of money by in some ways levying a very, very small amount. And so this equalizes it. The one thing that this does not take into consideration, which would be a good change in our formula, would be to take into consideration the relative wealth of people in the school district, because you may have high property wealth, but the average person in your school district may have a low income. And that would be, I'm not sure if we have anybody here who may be from like Door County. Those property values along the lake, high property values, but the people who actually live in Door County most of the time, all of the time, they're residents and their children go to school. A lot of them are very low income people because they're the year-round residents. And I think that's true in other areas of our state as well. This formula does not take care of that. And that's why I always push for categorical aid of that would recognize poverty, because poverty is an important consideration in education. It's a higher need student, it's a higher cost to deliver. And this equalization formula does not take that into consideration. So let's look at those categorical aids. If you could, okay, can flip that to the categorical aids. Thanks, Christian. Hey, Christian, thank you very much. These are some of our larger categorical aids. There are school districts who get transportation aid. And of course, that formula is dependent on how far you transport students. There's categorical aid for school age parents to provide programming for children who have children. Our library aid, and two of our bigger pieces are bilingual aid and special education. The bilingual aid, was it 4 years ago that we had the Blue Ribbon funding, the Blue Ribbon Commission? I think that was 4 years ago. 4 years ago at the Blue Ribbon Commission, we had a national expert come in to talk to us about what Wisconsin could do to improve our formula. And when they were looking at our two of our large categoricals, both bilingual aid and special education aid, there are some disagreements on this, but as I recall it, she said that our programming was pitiful because we provided such low state support for both of these categories of children. And in also oddly, as many of you probably know, in our bilingual aid, rather than looking at the children who need per child who needs assistance as they are learning English and moving into more general classrooms and needing less and less support, you have to have a certain number of students, and it's only within certain categories of languages, and it's incredibly complicated when it wouldn't have to be. Most states have a bilingual aid reimbursement program, or a bilingual aid categorical program, or a bilingual weighting to their formula that provides additional funds for children who are English language learners without the kind of weirdness that we experience here with our categorical aid. And then special education is actually a reimbursement, and it does say less than 25%, and that's wrong. I should have updated that. We're almost up to 30% reimbursement. Once upon a time, the state reimbursed special education costs at 66%, and because the state hasn't increased that pot of money, and costs for special education have increased, and the number of children in special education has increased, that percentage of state reimbursement has declined and declined and declined. We're going to look at that in detail in a little bit, but mind you, it has declined and declined and declined, mainly because it is not a, bear with me, the line item in our state budget is not a sum sufficient budget line, meaning that it pays for everything that they say they're going to pay for. If they said it's 30% reimbursement and we're going to guarantee it, that would be a sum sufficient funding. It's a sum certain funding, which means that here's your leprechaun pot of gold, and when it runs out, it runs out. And so you see the percentage of reimbursement in the state declining and declining and declining, to the point that local school districts nowadays in our state have to transfer over $1 billion, yes, $1 billion with a B, $1 billion to make up for that hole that the state doesn't pay for special education aid. The next piece on our beach ball list is, oh wait, let's see, is per pupil aid. And our per pupil aid, this is a long story too. So this is what our per pupil aid is. And the reason that we give per pupil aid is a lot political, because I want to make sure, legislators quite often want to make sure that every school district gets some state money. There are other states where there are some school districts that don't get state money because they have enough property wealth, and their formula is weighted such that they get their categoricals that way, but they don't get equalization aid. If you didn't have per pupil funding, just by head, then property wealthy districts might not get any funding at all. And that was seen to be politically unwise. And so we have this per pupil funding. Now, if you can squint and see this, or look at it in your own slide deck, this goes this goes back to what, 1993, right? Is that 1993?
Yep.
Yep, that's 1993. And that's when the promise was made that the state was going to fund us at 2/3. So, and that's when revenue limits started. So here we have the per pupil aid that goes like this, whereas just a little bit of funding. And in at this point here, which is about Act 10 era, see how that per pupil aid escalates. And now in the last couple budget cycles, or two of these dots would be one biennial budget, it's leveled off again. Here, that slope is where the state was funding kids per head. And I honestly, I get to say things like this because I believe it to be true. My opinion is that it was funded in this way as a political piece. It wasn't, funds weren't sent this way because it was directed by student need or by local school district need. It was because we could fund everybody. And it didn't matter whether you were in a rich district or a poor district, you got the same amount. Didn't matter what the needs were of your students in your district, you got the same amount. And that was just honestly, a political decision. It runs against that notion of equalization, and it also runs against the notion of uniformity or equity to fund students just as if every single student were exactly the same, not taking into consideration their circumstances, the context, or their educational need. But we do.
Julie?
Yep.
I think you are going to get into this more later, but that steep incline also coincides with our escalation of privatization. So that equity piece of the equality piece of it being the same, makes it easier for them to, put that voucher in a backpack, right?
It does. It makes it for them to be able to say, well, we pay X number of dollars per student. It's easier to do a voucher in every backpack, because then you can say, well, we're going to pay $1,000 for every student, whether they're public or private. Isn't that equal? Well, we'll get into that in vouchers, but exactly, that's another good point. And our voucher funding, some of our voucher funding is kind of tied to an increase in per pupil aid. And so when the state gives us aid in this way, they're also increasing the voucher amount. Probably more than you wanted to know, but it's certainly what you needed to know, because there are a lot of sleight of hands in here, honestly. And I am not a conspiracy theorist when it's true. So there are a lot of sleight of hands in here. If we could go to revenue limits, because that's on that chart too. In 1993, we got this revenue limit deal. And the state enacted these revenue limits to control local school district spending, because if they were going to promise that they would pay 2/3 of something, they didn't want local school districts to run out crazy and spend all sorts of money when they were when they would have to pay for 2/3 of that bill. So they set a revenue limit, which is a spending limit. The legislature can increase that revenue limit and has in fact increased that revenue limit over time. And can we go back to that slide with the revenue limit and the per pupil aid backwards? Yeah, that guy. So if this blue line, you're going to have to scrunch your face up again. This blue line of revenue limits, this is the amount that it was adjusted every year. It's not what the average revenue limit is, but that's where it was adjusted. And the deal was that they would give us a regular increase, kind of as an inflationary increase, a cost of living increase every budget cycle as time went on. And if you look, it goes up a little bit, and then holy smokes, the floor falls out, right? And can you imagine what budget that was? That's our Act 10 budget, right? Where not only did we not get increases, but we were told we had to cut what we were spending. And the way if you say that the legislature has cut funding in many legislative offices, they're in a panic and they don't want you ever to use that word, because I don't know, they use a different word. But actual spending declined. We were put on a budget that was a whole lot less than it was the year before, as you can see. And we have just started over here where you see the 18, 19, 19, 20 climbing out of that hole for one biennium where we got a revenue limit increase. And then we're flat funded again in terms of being given permission to spend money. So our spending limit, this is our spending limit line. And we're just now crawling out of that hole a little bit.
Julie?
Uh-huh.
Jenny, so Diane dropped in the chat a little bit here about, wasn't there a year about 15 to 20 years ago that the base per student was locked in what districts were spending at the time, and the increases were calculated from base? She's speaking to like when fiscally conservative districts were penalized versus districts that were high student spending.
Yes, let's look at that. Okay, so can we go to slide 13? Well, I already went through that kind of history, right? We already went through this history. I already told you this stuff. We can go back. But so in 1993, that is this lock is that spending lock that occurred in 1993, where they said, you can't spend any more. This is a revenue limit. It's a spending limit. And the only way that you can increase your spending is the legislature can increase your spending. You can go to referendum, or you also get more money from the state in per pupil, and then the categorical, that's above your revenue limit. But that's the way to change your revenue, your spending limit, is the legislature does that. And you saw where they were creeping up, and we used to have this kind of cost of living increase. And now 6 out of the last 8 years, we haven't had any increase. And you saw that huge decrease that we had during the Act 10 budget. And what people are commonly say is that school districts that were frugal in their spending in 1993, they got froze into this hell. And they have not been able to increase regularly, regardless of the needs of students in their district, because they're frozen in their spending limit. Many of those school districts have gone to referenda year after year after year after year. If
Julie, I can give an example of that.
yeah, do.
We went to referendum in Eau Claire in 2016. We were $430 some dollars below the state average per pupil. So figure that out for 11,300 students. But we're the 8th largest district. We're often compared to La Crosse. It's the 13th largest district. But because of where they were locked in 1994, 93, 94, we had Uniroyal closing in Eau Claire. We were conservative at the time. We did not levy to the max like other districts did. We are still a have-not district because of that. So we compared ourselves in 2016 to La Crosse with the differences in their budget.
Mhm.
Here we're the 8th largest, they're the 13th largest, and they had $222 million more dollars to spend than we did. That is how broken the system is.
Yeah. If you look here, this is a visual way to see how that brokenness. Thank you for that testimonial. Lots of like here. So Amy's probably, Nina's the same thing. Amy says in the chat. If you look at this red to green kind of chart, I think I have the next slide also, maybe another revenue limit. Is that, yeah, I think you might be able to see it a little easier in this one. Maybe not, but look at the differences. There's a huge, if you look on the key on this one, that's what I wanted to look at, that key. It really does range from a very low spending limit to significantly higher across the state. If I could if you don't mind me flipping through my papers, because I try not to remember numbers, because numbers change year after year and I always have to look it up. But we've got a huge range. The state average in 18-19 was 10,555. I think I have Madison in there in that year at 12,276 in 2018. And Melinda can correct me on that one. And the state high is 19. So the state low is much lower than the average. And between these red and green districts, the question is, one, is this uniform? Two, is this equitable? And three, does this actually provide education to children according to their needs to meet the state constitutional right to equal educational opportunities? And this thing is painful. Certainly one of the pieces that we have been rallying for is to increase those revenue limits. In the last 2 cycles, the state has said that they've increased their funding. That's why we can't say they cut, because they increased the funding. They increased the funding. However, they didn't increase our spending limit, so we couldn't spend any more. What they did is they increased the state spending, and then all of the rest of that money basically drained out the back end and was given back as property tax relief at the local level. And that's a shell game, to say you're increasing education spending when really it's property tax relief. Or, to get on my high horse, in another way, another thing the state says is, oh, that we have increased state spending. And really what it is that levy, the school district levy and the first dollar tax credit and those kind of things, they actually count that as school spending. And we all know, as we do our taxes, that that's actually property tax relief for individuals in various communities across the state. That is not state spending, but somehow the legislature counts that as state spending on education. Sleight of hand. How can you prove that? Go to any kind of Fiscal Bureau memo, and they'll clearly show you exactly how that money slides right out from state spending, as long as they don't increase that revenue limit. If they increase state spending, you can't spend the money, so you have to give it back to your community in property tax relief. There's nothing to be proven. Well, what we could do, thank you for asking, Amy, and what we can do is I can send a document, or Christian can send a document to everybody, and I'll put a bunch of links in it. I can't imagine that you guys really want to read Fiscal Bureau memos, but I can give you all the Fiscal Bureau memos, and the Fiscal Bureau is really, their word is gold. They're incredible. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Jenny. If you look in that Fiscal Bureau portal, there is more than one fiscal note and Fiscal Bureau report on revenue limits. There's also on the the tax levy as well. So it's there. There's it's just true. It's just true. There's nothing hard to prove at all. So let's go to, okay, can we go to the slide 15, I think it is, maybe. The state can change the revenue limit. Okay, that's all right. But go to the referendum one there, Christian. There. Chris was talking about, Chris, how many times did you guys go to referenda?
I don't know how many total now. I was just on the board when we went in 2016. I would imagine maybe 4, and they're going for another one now.
And I bet if people put in the chat how many referenda their district, now these are operating referenda, not building referenda. And somebody actually in the notes, in our registration notes, wanted us to think about, where is it? The essential role of operating referenda. Here it is. Because with these operating referenda in school districts that are locked in at a low per pupil spending rate, and their educational need has increased, maybe increased poverty, maybe increased special education, maybe increased English language learners, maybe just the cost of paper has increased, or you want to give your teachers a raise or some benefits, all of those things. You can't do any of that unless your revenue limit, your spending limit increases. So you have to go to referendum over and over and over and over and over again. And that is to keep the doors open. And you have to go, you can't just increase it forever. You increase it for a certain amount of time, and then you've got to go back and increase it again for a certain amount of time, again and again and again. The lucky thing is, what we have, again, you have to scrunch your face up next to your screen, or use your handy dandy slide deck that we already sent out to you, and look at the passage rates. The passage rates have just continued to build because our public is with us. Particularly, for the most part, the local community is behind their public schools. They know that they need additional money to keep the doors open and need additional money that they can spend to meet children's growing educational needs. So the good piece is that they're passing. There are a couple of years that it was like, for operating referenda, we were passing them at like 95%. And this is a DPI slide, and it is, if I recall correctly, that is both building and operating referenda. If you split it out, we pass as a state the operating referenda at a higher rate than we do building referenda. Christian, can you go on to the next slide for me, the school finance challenges?
Julie, while you're switching over to, I'm going to drop this for people who have never walked out over a legislative fiscal bureau note before, Memo. I had that tab wide open already, but I'm going to put one in that's pretty easy to read, and it actually is really relevant to kind of what we're going through right now. But it's the Fiscal Bureau memo on our maintenance of effort standard when spending the CARES money. And because our investment was flat in the last biennium budget, this Bureau note talks about us not meeting our maintenance of effort in the state in order to spend the CARES money in appropriate ways. And it's interesting because you'll be able to tell that some people get mad when they read those fiscal bureaus, but to Julie's point, like, their job is to analyze the numbers and just tell us how it fits with the law and what those numbers look like. And so this is a nice what's it called? Training wheels into fiscal bureau memo.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And Jenny, there are a bunch of them on the Google Doc that's called 5 things every legislator should know. I just dumped a bunch of those on there yesterday. I'm going to go through 3 lists of horrors, and I'm going to do them quickly so I don't put anybody to bed other than those children that need to go to sleep. Let's see. If we move to the next slide, let's talk about special education funding. If you look here, and I think I've probably done special education funding enough. This was what I was talking about earlier when I kind of jumped the gun. And you can see how our reimbursement rate has declined. This chart only started in 2000. And if you go back further than that, I think I said that we used to have a reimbursement rate of 66%, and then we declined down to 24.5%. Now we have climbed out of that a little bit, and we've gone to in the budget. It says that it's a 30% reimbursement rate, but it hasn't actually come to 30% reimbursement rate because they didn't allocate sufficient funds to actually fund that for all of the spending that we do for special education. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that we shouldn't spend money for children with special education needs. I started out as a special ed attorney, and I come from a whole family of special educators. And I recognize that there's a federal legislation that says that we need to fund children as we morally should, fund those special education needs. But when the state doesn't do their share, what happens is that money has to be reallocated from the regular budget, school district's regular budget, and to fill that hole. It's over $1 billion hole right now. I think the next slide is what the governor's budget was, including, oh no, this is so that, wait, go back one, Christian, because that's an important quote. It's not just me. It's, the Wisconsin Policy Forum. They can prove it. Somebody was talking about how do we prove something? Well, here we've got another credible source. The Fiscal Bureau says it as well. There's a Fiscal Bureau memo that says that we have a $1 billion hole in state funding for special education that needs to be filled. Also, the reimbursement rate for private schools and for our voucher schools is up to $9,000 per student, or 90% reimbursement rate. And to say that public schools only get a 28% reimbursement rate, and in some private programs, they get a 90% reimbursement rate, that just doesn't seem equitable even. It doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem logical at all. Can I say that one more time? So here it is. Is that Clarice? Is that right? Look at this slide deck, because that's where they've said it the best. They just read that slide, circle it on your slide deck. And Melinda just said something about us being last in the nation. Thank you very much for reminding me. We are last in the nation in terms of state funding for special education. We used to be, next to last, and now we're last. And we're also last in terms of increases in state spending for education generally since the Great Recession. So Christian, can we go to the next one? We're going to be, here, this is the governor's, some of the dollar amounts in terms of how of special education. I just wanted to put those on there, and to remind you that to increase 20%, to go from 30% reimbursement to 50%, that costs about $350 million. Remind you, we have a rainy day fund of $5.6 billion. To increase from 30% reimbursement rate to 50% reimbursement, just to 50% reimbursement rate would only cost $350 million. I recognize those are big numbers, but we have $5.6 billion in a rainy day fund. We can spend this money. And let's go to the next one. I think the next one is another cheery one, and I don't know which this is not cheery at all. I didn't know whether I'd done divestment yet or, so click it through. What we have created since 1990, when we started our experiment with the Milwaukee Parental Choice program in 1990, a small program with lots of limits on it, is we have basically created two systems that we're funding, that the state is funding. One system of public schools that we're required to fund constitutionally, and one system of vouchers and independent charter schools. And I'm going to say independent charters means those charters that are authorized by someone other than the school board. Because we have lots of school instrumentality charters where the school board authorizes them. They're part of our public system. Independent charters are private schools that some other authorizing agency, like UW system, has allowed them to operate. And they're basically private schools that receive public money. And my craziness about this is that it hurts in all sorts of ways. Certainly, it takes taxpayer money away from publics and sends it to private, because we have two systems that we're funding, and that it keeps increasing. And in another little sleight of hand, these monies are moved out of the funds before the legislature divvies it up to the 421 school districts that we have. So we lose that money off the top, and the tuition in vouchers and charters is a sum, I always get this confused, a sum certain. So if the legislature says that they're going to pay $5,000 or X number of dollars, they actually pay it. It's not like the reimbursement rate where they promise that they're going to try to pay, but then they may not have enough money. They may not have allocated enough money in that particular pot to actually carry it through. So,
Julie, can I say something? This is Chris.
oh
So-
yeah, because I can get you cranked up about this too.
I know, but when they put it that way, they have put in state statute that the voucher or will cover what it needs to cover. They will get what they need. Your public schools have no state statute at all to guarantee us anything, which is amazing to me that they've built that all in biennium budgets without any debate, without any
Oh yeah, because all of these voucher programs until this year were all part of the budget bill, up or down votes.
Yeah. So I just, I think some sufficient is what they get in vouchers, and some certain is us, because we only get what we get.
And
If
that's not very certain.
Nope.
No.
I think it's made confusing so that it is confusing. To have you all here tonight to try and understand that, and so many in the chat that do, gives me such hope, because this is hard stuff to understand.
Well, people like to think that it's too complex to get into. It's not. It really isn't. I mean, like, you could take out that little balloon slide. Take a look at it. That's not complicated. Let's look at the next one. I think this is the one that builds. Okay, here we go. Growing and growing and growing, growing and growing and growing. And we have a bill that actually has been passed through our legislature, which would take all of the limits off of our voucher programs statewide, so that there would be no limits in terms of whether parents' income limits anywhere, and that would take off the limits in terms of the number of students who could be in any program. So it is increasing astronomically. And let's look at some of the numbers. That's what's next. So in how did it get to be this much? Well, and this actually, I think you have to click through, because this is a Heather one that builds and builds and builds. Thanks. And then we'll just hold it there. How did it get to be so much? Well, in the statewide program, there's a high percentage of students who actually were never really enrolled in the public schools before they went to the voucher schools. And that was one of the original things that was like, well, you're actually taking a child out of the public schools, so we might as well take the public money, and the public money is going to follow the child. As Jenny says, we're getting to the point of putting a voucher in every backpack, and the money follows each child. But in that last statewide program, over 75% of the kids that were coming in there, they had never been enrolled in the public schools. So that's really not taking students from the public and moving them into the voucher program. The only thing that's changing there is the parents are no longer paying the tuition, the state is paying the tuition. And that's how we get to these incredible numbers. So in 1990, this started out as a small program in Milwaukee, and now we got state spending over $350 million a year.
Julie, I know we have some candidates on this Zoom tonight too, learning tonight, but it can't be underscored more that when they talk about the number of students who now take part in it, oftentimes proponents of the voucher will speak to that as if we're driving droves of people to use a voucher. But what you said is completely true. 80% of those students were already
Oh,
enrolled
80,
into it.
it's 80%
I
now.
think so.
is it,
Yeah, it's
Jenny?
like
Okay.
but since they lifted the last time, that they were already tuition paying students who now have their tuition subsidized by the Wisconsin taxpayers. So I just want to make sure people know that, because oftentimes it'll be said that so many more students are using the voucher because it's so popular. Well, really, we're just paying tuition for students who are already paying tuition.
Oh, well, and as somebody in the chat, John Scott says, so that the money that previously could be used, they can use it on something else, or they, it's money that the parents would use, or the parents would have spent, or it may be money that the nonprofit or the church may have spent and raised themselves, but now the state is paying for it. And as you increase the number of students that you pay, you are increasing the costs of the system. And if you're going to do that, you need to increase the flow of money to the system as well. I'm going to flip to the next one because people get this. So here's the amount just for these general school aid reductions. That's the statewide reduction. In addition, the local school district is funds come out of the local school district's funds as well. So it is over 350 million total that we're spending on voucher and on voucher programs. Let's go to the next one and we'll see if we can get out of the vouchers. And oh yeah. Oh, how could I think I said something about this before, but I didn't give you the bill number. So it's AB 970. It's the voucher expansion bill, takes the lids off of everything. There are no more limits on the number of students that can participate, and no income limits either. And when the Legislative Fiscal Bureau wrote this memo and the Department of Public Instruction wrote this memo, the starting additional cost was 500 million. And they said that they had no idea how much further it would go from there. They just couldn't judge, but it would continue to escalate as we paid for more and more children's tuition. I think is that the last slide on vouchers? Yeah, that's the last slide on vouchers. So anybody want to rant any more about vouchers?
Are we being heard or?
Yes, David, go ahead.
Yes.
So, Ravitch always argues every time it's come up for a vote, vouchers, it loses. And I'm wondering, just as an organization, whether we should be encouraging groups to have referendum, local referendum. It's not binding like in some states, but at least it could raise the dismay of this. It
could. The other thing that local organizations, local communities have done that I think has been very helpful is doing the voucher transparency piece on the tax bills.
Right, we do that in Milwaukee, but it sure hasn't slowed stuff down.
Do you think people don't read it, David?
I don't know. Jenny, what do you think?
I knew you were going to take me in, Dave. We were the ones there arguing about ink on paper and how much it would cost to have our tax bill insert with the city. But I think that when you get your tax bill, there's a lot going on, so people maybe aren't paying very close attention to it. And Milwaukee has had a very complicated relationship with vouchers and with choice. And so I think where the tax bills will be more maybe the insert will be more effective in communities that haven't been struggling with this as long as we have been. And that's just my 2 cents worth on that.
Yeah. At least this term, that voucher expansion bill actually was not part of the budget bill. There was a vote, although I believe it was a voice vote. I don't think anybody had to go on record that they were voting for voucher expansion. I think it was a voice vote on both the Senate and the Assembly side. So lots of money, lots of money.
Are
And
you
now
talking about the AB 970 there, Julie?
Yeah,
So in the Assembly, AB 970, the voucher cap
expansion.
one, they did do a visual vote that we tracked on the tracker, and it was almost entirely partisan, with Democrats voting no and Republicans voting yes, with the exception of Representative Joel Kitchens, who voted no.
Thank you. He also voted no in the at the Education Committee. He voted against it in the Education Committee as well. And maybe one of you could drop in, somebody could drop in the chat the vote tracker, because the Public Education Network website has this incredible vote tracker these days. If you really want to nerd out during the legislative session, you can find out how your legislators voted on all of the big education bills. And this session, there were lots of them. And it's a really handy kind of thing. It may take you a while to get used to clicking back and forth and reading the bills, but it's definitely worth looking at how your legislators voted. So let's go to more good news about divestment in education. I say divestment because I get in trouble with some legislators when I say cut, because they say there hasn't been a cut. So, okay, can we look at the first substantive slide here? There are just a few of them. In here, you can see, this is from the Wisconsin Policy Forum. And on the left-hand side are the divestments where we've had cumulative cuts across the last 10 years. And just to help you think about where money is going, on the right-hand side, you can see the expanded tax cuts that have passed at the same time during the same years that the legislature has decreased the amount that school districts can spend. And it makes perfect sense that the money's got to go someplace, right? I think I said this already, that in the state of Wisconsin is last, as in dead last, in terms of increases to school spending since the Great Recession. And you can see that instead of spending, we've been taking tax cuts. If you give me the next slide, we can see this divestment in another way. And then this only goes back to 95. I usually go back to 93. This is a DPI slide. It goes back to 95. This is the percentage of state money that we have that is allocated to K-12 schools, education spending. And you can see how we've decreased in terms of percentage of spending. We're at between 32, 33% of our state general fund, state money, is spent on education spending, as opposed to, look at our high of 2003, where we were spending, what is that, 43%? That's quite a turnaround. And if I were to be able to figure out, I need an economist to do this, but years ago, 100 years ago, our grandparents, or maybe less than 100, I exaggerate for effect, our parents and grandparents, and maybe great-grandparents, spent state money to build a public education system. And they made choices to spend money, invest in Wisconsin's future so we would have a good education system. So many of us could have a good, solid K-12 education. And we have turned our back on that as we have decreased the spending. And to Mike Julka's point, thank you. And Jenny brought it up too. In order to receive federal money, the COVID money, ESSER and CARES money, we have to keep that percentage going forward. We can't, it's a maintenance of effort. It's called a maintenance of effort requirement. So we have to keep our spending at 33% of our spending has to go to K-12 education. And the state has cut that so narrowly that every time they're spending a dime on other things, if you're geeky enough to read all of these bills, at the very bottom of it, if they propose spending $100,000 on a bridge, they also have to propose spending enough to get 33% of that to K-12 education as well, so that we meet this maintenance of effort requirement. And the legislators' argument generally is, well, you're getting all of this federal money, you don't need state money. And that's why there's a federal requirement of maintenance of effort. And it has been very hard to hold their feet to the fire so that we can actually even get the federal money. It's been jeopardized over and over and over again as the state has spent on other things and continued to cut K-12 education. Winding up here, let's see. This very last slide, we do have the funds. Go to the next one there. We do have the funds. This is an issue of political will, priorities, and morality. According to the Fiscal Bureau, we've got this additional billions of dollars in spendable revenue and $5.6 billion on a rainy day fund. The revenue projections we've seen, we have this historic opportunity to actually invest, maybe even invest just as we did maybe even 15 years ago, not go back to as the percentage of investment that our parents and grandparents gave to our system. But we can do better than this. This is a moment that we shouldn't lose. And instead, the legislature's been doing other things. But in terms of our politics and our advocacy, Marquette poll over and over again shows that people are willing to spend money on K-12 education. They're willing to increase taxes to spend money on K-12 education. And if you remember the percentage of the pass rates for referenda in the state, our local people are willing to tax themselves for good schools, for equitable schools, for meeting children's educational needs. This is a great time to really push for it and to be a good advocate for children in the state of Wisconsin.